Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could teach the gullible to never be so comfortable with lies they eat like comfort food? To disregard the bogus claims and pseudoscientific claims. Can you imagine just how much indeed the world would change? No more political predators playing on the populace, but ilkas and plots to shift and kill metropolis. No more villains with the title in the Bible, holding phony temper Bibles like the stuff they teach is vital. Imagine it was normal to have to prove a claim you make, and folks really feel ashamed expressing content that was fake. It's not to say we never make mistakes, it's just to say we go out of our way to show the evidence it takes.
Remain skeptical while you travel the road of reason. Stay strapped with logic and fast. That's what it is, yo. Keep reality intact to help the truth grow. Question every claim, especially the ones you believe in. Remain skeptical while you travel the road of reason.
Hello and welcome to Road to Reason, Skeptic's Guide to the 21st Century. I'm your host, Sarah Levin, a local secular activist living in Washington, D.C. And today my guest co-host is Nick Little, legal director of the Center for Inquiry.
Hi, good afternoon.
So we're going to start off with a few news updates. Nick, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I think the biggest thing that happened this week we can see is the Supreme Court finally accepting a case on same-sex marriage rights, and with the case in the Sixth Circuit, the First Circuit Court of Appeals, that turned around and rejected the right to same-sex marriage. And now we're going to see this going to the Supreme Court. It's going to be argued, I believe, in April, which should give us a decision early this summer. And it means that 2015 will probably be the year we see same-sex marriage rights across the entire country.
It's so exciting. It's a long time coming.
Definitely, definitely. On the other hand, we're also seeing, out of Colorado, the other side of the litigation process. When you wake up and see that we have a bakery run by a gay man in Colorado, and this baker is currently, he may well be facing a lawsuit because a Christian activist out in Colorado decided to go and place an order for a series of cakes, all with extremely offensive anti-homosexual slogans on the cakes. And he, of course, is now claiming that he's discriminated against because the baker refused to make the cakes. In fact, he offered to make the cakes, but he said that, you know, I won't put the slogans on those cakes. And we're seeing this, it's a failure on certain religious people's ability to understand that discriminating against somebody because of their sexuality, their basic makeup, is fundamentally different to turning around and saying, I have a right that everybody has to parrot the same opinions as me. So fortunately, I don't think the case is going to go too far, but that's an example of the kind of thing that we're seeing out there at the moment. Right.
And there are other attempts to kind of backtrack now that marriage equality has made it so far. For example, in Oklahoma, State Representative Todd Russ filed a bill that would put an end to marriage licenses in the state, and the result would be that only a religious official could marry you. So there's a lot of different tactics that the right and conservatives are using now that they see that marriage equality has made it so far.
Absolutely.
Another update in the news, last week Republicans passed a bill that would restrict government funding for abortion through government employee insurance policies and people receiving subsidies through the Affordable Care Act. Now, what was interesting about this was originally what was on the docket was a 20-week ban outright against abortions based on some kind of bogus claims that the fetus can feel pain at that point, which has long been debunked. But it was so extreme as a bill that Republican women were opposed to it, so they had to scrap it and swap it out for the attack on funding. And the reason it was too extreme even for Republican women is because there was a part of the bill that the only exception for rape victims was if a rape victim had reported her rape to the police. That's the only time that there was an exemption for victims of rape, which was way too extreme even for their own party.
And especially as we know, the majority of rapes in this country do go unreported, and clearly it was a very restrictive piece that was placed in, attempting to remove the right to abortion from as many women as possible.
That's right. So there have been a number of other cases with, I think, with wedding cakes as well.
There have been, and the wedding cake cases have tended to be that gay couples have gone to bakers, and the bakers have turned around and refused to make those cakes. So out in Colorado, this is clearly an attempt to get publicity. This is an individual who's simply looking to get his name in the news and to be out there. But unfortunately, if you sue and you claim, as we've seen in every case from Hobby Lobby down, claiming that your religious rights have been infringed allows you to do a lot of crazy things under the legal system at the moment. And that's a problem. The line has to be drawn. We have to stop somehow on this.
That's right. So the theme of today's show is going to be upcoming political battles. So we'll be talking a lot about the new tactic of the religious right, which is conscience clauses or religious refusals. Could you talk a little bit about that? What is a conscience clause?
What we've seen across the country is, over the years, going back to the civil rights movement, is a series of mainly they're called public accommodation laws, that if you're out there in business or if you're providing services to the public, you're not allowed to discriminate against your customers. And these were initially you couldn't discriminate based on race, and it moved to you can't discriminate based on gender. And a lot of places are now adding in sexual orientation discrimination into there. So LGBT people can't be discriminated against in many places. Now, what we're then seeing is certain people turning around and saying, it offends my religion that I have to provide a service to a homosexual person, that if I allow a homosexual couple to stay in my hotel, for example. And they're butting up against these laws which have been passed saying you can't discriminate. So the religious right to the rescue on this, they ride in and they propose laws which turn around and say, no, you know what? You may not be allowed to discriminate against LGBT people unless you claim it's based on your religious beliefs. And they put exceptions into these laws saying you can discriminate as much as you want as long as it's in support of your religion.
Mm-hmm. And my understanding is that, so can you talk a little bit about the ENDA, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act? Because we saw, I think there was a split among the LGBT community over whether they would support this because they were afraid exactly of this, of conscience clauses.
ENDA, the Center for Inquiry, we supported ENDA initially. Unfortunately, it did. They put in a huge religious exemption. Basically, the religious exemption so wide you could drive a truck through it. That basically gutted the protections of ENDA, so it would have left LGBT people facing any religious employee could simply fire them. And so at the Center for Inquiry, we felt, along with a lot of other organizations, we had to withdraw our support from ENDA as it ended up being proposed because of the major religious exemption that was put into it.
And what is the status of that bill now?
ENDA is still, it's waiting for our Senate approval, I believe. It's kind of dropped off the radar a lot on it because of the problem with the religious exemption that was put into it. And unfortunately, given the state of things after the midterm elections and the control of Congress that we have at the moment, I'm not sure you'll be seeing it brought forward in the near future.
Okay. So we'll be talking a lot more about religious refusals because it's made its way into a lot of other issues, including abortion. But I'd like to kind of bring it back to marriage equality and the next step because it really seems like the LGBT movement has a lot of momentum. I think a lot of people are hoping the Supreme Court will grant it. Well, actually, let me ask you about that. What are your predictions about how the Supreme Court will take this case?
I don't believe the Supreme Court would have taken this case unless they intended to find a right to marriage equality that runs across the entire country, that there is a constitutional right. How exactly they're going to find the constitutional rights up for debate, whether it'll be a due process right like they found in Loving or whether it'll be an equal protection right. I think my personal opinion is the court is going to find in favor of this. Justice Kennedy has written multiple decisions that are in favor of LGBT rights. I would imagine Justice Kennedy will therefore end up writing this decision. And my own personal prediction, and absolutely a personal thing, is that this will be 7-2 in favor of a right to same-sex marriage. I believe even Justice Alito will end up voting with it, and the only opposition will be Justices Scalia and Thomas.
Right, okay.
That's my hope, and that's my thought on it. Of course, I also thought that Hobby Lobby would come the other way round, and so I'm not always right on these things.
Yeah, and they did at first kind of try to leave it up to the states. Is there any history of that in the past where they leave an issue up to the states, it gains a lot of momentum, it becomes legal in more states, and then they kind of take it and kind of ride the wave?
Marriage is a very special issue under American law. Marriage is purely a state law issue. The different states have always had different rules on who can get married and when you can get married. And it's going back to the Loving versus Virginia case, which was the interracial marriage case. That's really when the court had to step in and say that this right is so important and it's so ludicrous to prevent interracial marriage that no, this is the one thing that the states aren't allowed to discriminate on. So I don't really think there's in the same way, I can't think of a major issue that's the same that has come out that's been left to the states. And it's quite possible that if the Sixth Circuit hadn't come round and made its decision the way it did, that we would never have seen this at the Supreme Court.
Right. And what about this case? Was it in Colorado? I mean, would that stand up at all? It was Oklahoma. Can a state just say, well, we don't do marriage licenses anymore? Is that even?
There's a lot of talk in certain communities, certain religious communities, that the way to defend marriage is to get the state completely out of religion. The idea being that religion should be a purely private matter. But the thing is, the state is so involved in marriage. It's completely involved in it, from your taxes to your immigration rights. There's really no way to uncouple the state from it. I don't believe there is any chance of a law banning civil marriage being upheld. Recently at the Center for Inquiry, we won a case in Indiana. We won the right for secular celebrants to train secular celebrants to celebrate marriages on the same basis as ministers. And because of that, the constitutional argument in that case would work just as well as the idea of saying that you couldn't make marriage, which is so important for your tax rights, for everything, you couldn't make that dependent on having to go to a religious person. I think that would just be unconstitutional. And I think any court would agree with me on that. And
are you expecting, is that kind of the Center for Inquiry's tactic going forward, to go state by state and try to get the same rights for secular celebrants? Absolutely. We believe that secular celebrants should be allowed to perform marriages, that when an atheist couple, for example, get married, they should be allowed to choose the person they want to celebrate their wedding. We have in DC itself allowed secular celebrants, and Indiana, and we're looking at pushing that further. Okay. We're going to go to announcements, a short PSA, and then we'll be back. I don't know when it's... I'm not ready.
Preventing wildfires. That's all Smokey wants for his 70th birthday.
Thank you, dear. Well, you're very supple. Just like I was at your age. Back then, I was a sex expert. Used to call me the buttered biscuit. I know about birth control, too. So you can ask me anything, baby.
Bedsider.org has birth control information and a lot more. And it's...
Have you had sex in this car yet?
This is Richard Dawkins. Doing commercials is unfamiliar territory for me, but I'm inviting you to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, on Fairfax Public Access every Sunday. Each week, the hosts tackle wishful thinking, religion, pseudoscience, and the harm they cause, with a combination of facts, humor, and community involvement. They challenge believers to defend their faith and give you, the skeptic, a voice. With live call-ins for viewers and streaming on the World Wide Web, there's never a dull moment. Don't wait. Look at them now on Facebook and YouTube. And remember to watch Road to Reason, A Skeptic's Guide to the 21st Century, or there'll be hell to pay.
Looks like it's done.
Don't let salmonella get funky with your chicken. On average, 1 in 6 Americans will get a foodborne illness this year. You can't see these microbes, but they might be there. So learn the right temperature to cook each type of meat. Keep your family safe at foodsafety.gov.
Body language can tell you all sorts of things. Like someone is having a stroke. Know the sudden signs. Learn fast. Face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulty. Time to call 911 and get them to a hospital immediately. Learn the body language and spot a stroke fast.
Why is Connor having trouble focusing in school?
Having trouble finding Connor's middle school? Would you like directions?
No, why is Connor having trouble focusing in school?
Finding lowest airfare to Istanbul.
No, I'm tired of fighting with him over homework.
Home, walk, restaurant. Need a review?
No, I need help. He's very smart, but his mind wanders. He's disorganized.
I think I understand.
Oh, good.
French fries. Finding best potatoes.
No!
Russet. Fingerling. Yukon Gold.
Why don't you understand me?
Sorry, I was trying to show how Connor feels every day. Frustrating, isn't it? Redirecting to understood.org.
For the 1 in 5 kids with learning and attention issues, this is what life can feel like. Explore understood.org, a free online resource about learning and attention issues, designed to help your child thrive in school and in life. Understood.org, because understanding is everything.
Preventing wildfires. That's all Smokey wants for his 70th birthday.
Welcome back to the show. This is Road to Reason, A Skeptic's Guide to the 21st Century. I'm your host, Sarah Levin. I'm a local secular activist, and this is the legal director of Center for Inquiry, Nick Little. I'd like to pick up where we left off talking about marriage equality and religious refusals and conscience clauses. Nick?
Well, I think what we really need to keep in mind on this is how stunningly fast the move has been. It was only back in 2003, in fact, when the Supreme Court decided the case of Lawrence versus Texas. And that was the first time that the federal government turned around to the states and said, you can't criminalize homosexual activity. And so in 12 years' time from that case, we've moved from the situation where people could be put in prison for being homosexual to a time now that, as of, I believe it was Friday, Alabama's law banning same-sex marriage was struck down, and it's now 37 states permit same-sex marriage. So what that essentially means is there are only 13 states out there that do carry on discriminating in marriage, and those 13 states are behind Alabama on a civil rights issue. So maybe they need to look at themselves in the mirror and actually realize that you know, the writing is on the wall on that. So we've got the case coming up with the Supreme Court. I think most people think it's going to be decided and will be a victory for equality on it. So it's going to be nice that hopefully this summer we'll get a very positive Supreme Court story to tell.
Mm-hmm. And while we should definitely be optimistic about marriage equality, we do have to keep in mind that there are many other tactics out there that the religious right is using to try to kind of backtrack. One of them is religious exemptions for anti-discrimination laws. So I'd like to kind of lead into the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, right, and what that has to do with it. So backtracking a little bit, last June, I believe, the Hobby Lobby Lobby decision was decided by the Supreme Court, that your employer, if they had a conscious objection to certain methods of birth control, they could deny you health care coverage that includes those types of abortion, contraception. What does that have to do with LGBT discrimination?
That's an interesting question. What we've seen is two very separate types of legislation put forward in the states and at a federal level. And on the one hand, we had what we discussed earlier, which is we call them right to discriminate laws, which turns around and say, my religion doesn't allow me to serve LGBT people, for example. On the other hand, we've got RFRAs. RFRA, which stands for, and as lawyers we like to abbreviate, absolutely everything. The Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And what that turns around and says is that, okay, you can have all these laws to require, but any law that affects everybody, you can make a claim that it burdens your religious practice, and so you should be exempt from that law. And it's turning around and saying, we're special. Religion is special, and we shouldn't have to follow the same laws that other people follow. So this is a federal law. It specifically does not apply to the states. The Supreme Court has turned around and said that this does not apply to the states. It's a law that I believe it's been 20 years. Yes, it was 1993, I believe, when it was passed, so just over 20 years. And it allows people, such as the owners of Hobby Lobby, to turn around and say they should be exempt from a law that applies to everybody else. And that, to me, is enshrining religious discrimination into the system. It's giving religious people extra rights that other people don't have, and that, to me, is unconstitutional.
So just to clarify for people watching today, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, what we're calling RFRA, is the law that the Hobby Lobby decision was based on. So basically, the Supreme Court was interpreting a law that was passed by Congress.
Absolutely.
And the reason I was talking about it in terms of Hobby Lobby and contraception is that a lot of LGBT groups were very active speaking against this case because they saw that, well, maybe this specific case is about contraception, but if your employer can discriminate you based on their religious beliefs, they can easily extend that to discrimination against the LGBT community.
Even if we simply just keep it to the healthcare issue, the healthcare situation, it's perfectly feasible that an employer can turn around and say that they believe homosexual behavior is sinful, and providing insurance for AIDS medication offends their religion. And so on exactly the same argument that the Greens made regarding contraception, the Greens being the owners of Hobby Lobby, the same argument could be made about medication such as AZT, antiviral drugs. The same argument could be made by a Scientologist employer who doesn't want to cover mental health care for his or her employees. A Jehovah's Witness employer who doesn't want to cover blood transfusions. What we at the Center for Inquiry, and I believe most of the secular movement worried about Hobby Lobby and about RFRA, is it places something as important as your healthcare rights. Something as fundamentally important as that becomes dependent on your employer's religious preferences. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's not a positive way to look at things.
I have a question about that. So now, where would you be legally if you are applying for a job? What are your legal rights as far as, now that Hobby Lobby is passed, asking about your employer's religious beliefs? Do you have the right to say, well, I'd like to know how my employer's religious beliefs are going to affect the insurance. Can you please, do you have the right to ask?
I believe you can ask the question. I'm not certain I want to be the person sat in an interview who's asking my future boss that question. And I think it's very important, Sarah, when you look at these situations, we need to look at the balance of power. Right. Involved. And if we go back to the entire purpose of RFRA, The Centre for Inquiry, we opposed RFRA from the beginning. We think it was a bad law, we think it's a discriminatory law, we think it's actually an unconstitutional law. But the idea was to protect minority religions. The idea was to turn around, and where RFRA came about was a case called Employment Division versus Smith. And a gentleman, a Native American gentleman who as part of his religion used peyote. And he was fired from his job, and he was denied unemployment benefits because he failed a drug test. And so he was considered to have been fired with cause. And he sued, saying, this is part of my religion. I do this as part of my religion. And he turned around and he lost the case. He lost the case because it turned around and said, that law applies to everyone. You're not entitled to a religious exemption. Congress then comes in and says, we're going to create a law on this. So they created a law on the matter. And actually, the decision itself was by that famous liberal hothead Justice Scalia made the decision that, you know, this wasn't covered. So these are the sort of people who were intended to be covered. And we had a decision under RFRA. We had a decision under RFRA where a church tried to import, a very minority church tried to import a hallucinogenic tea from the rainforest, and they were denied it. They got an exception. These are small groups being oppressed by the majority in society. We also saw last week a case on the sister legislation to RFRA, which is the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act.
Oh, wow.
Or I'm not even going to try and pronounce the acronym. But that applies mainly to prisoners. And we saw a prisoner who sued the state of Arkansas and won that he has a right to have a half-inch beard as part of his religion. And the idea there was, again, it's a minority group in prison being protected. The situation with employers and employees turns that totally on its head. If you're sat in a job interview, it's the employer who has the power. The employer has the resources. And this is a very new use of RFRA to defend the majority against alleged oppression. I mean, the idea that there is this battle against majority religions in this country that we see all the time, the claims of persecution when there simply isn't persecution.
Is there a way to kind of strike a balance? How can you protect minorities but without it being able to be turned on its head and used by the majority in the way that it's been? Well,
and that's how RFRA was initially put in. And I think that the change that came with Hobby Lobby is this is the first time, if we look at the cases with a Native American taking peyote, there's a law that the government puts on, a person asks for an exemption to that law, and if they receive that exemption, nobody else's position has changed. It doesn't affect anybody else. Hobby Lobby was the first time that somebody came and asked for a religious exemption to a law, and granting them that religious exemption removes the right from somebody else. If you're an employee at Hobby Lobby, you previously had the right, under the Affordable Care Act, under Obamacare, you had the right to turn around to receive this insurance without co-payment. Unfortunately now, if you work for a religious employer who claims an exemption, you don't have that right. We argued in the case, and a lot of groups argued in the case, that makes this use of the law unconstitutional because it's a violation of the Establishment Clause, because what it turns around and does is says the religion of Hobby Lobby, the religion of the owners of Hobby Lobby, is getting special privileges, and the Establishment Clause is meant to prevent that. What can we do about that? At the moment, that's what worries us. The Supreme Court has turned around and said that yes, you can favor religion like this. You can favor religion. And they've also turned around, shockingly, in the Hobby Lobby case and said, not just individuals, not just human beings have religion, but corporations can be seen to have religion as well. Where that's going to go, we just don't know. I mean, will we see General Electric taking a religious stance? how would
they
we
could.
They could under the law at the moment. And in the opinion, Alito said he didn't think it was likely that would happen. But when we're dealing with people's basic rights, I'm not comfortable leaving it to what's likely out there. People have constitutional rights and they need to be protected.
Yeah. So I'd like to move on from this to what the implications are in the state level,
Right.
because now we're starting to see that states are starting to implement their own RFRA, because RFRA only applies federally, correct?
Yes.
So there are more extreme versions. So what are the repercussions of this passing in the state? What could that look like?
The basis of RFRA, it's a very simple law. It turns around and says that if a law substantially burdens your religious rights, you can claim an exemption, and then there's a series of things you have that need to be proven to get the exemption. What some states are doing is they're omitting one word out of that. They're omitting the word substantially, which is very worrying. So their laws would be if a general law burdens your religious rights. Doesn't even have to be substantial. And honestly, every single law out there can be seen to burden religion in some way. If you turn around and, for example, I don't know, sales tax. Sales tax burdens someone's religious rights, because if they claim, I would have given that money to a church, they're now being burdened. At the moment, we'd say that's clearly not a substantial burden, that you have to pay an extra 45 cents when you buy a book. But if it doesn't have to be substantial, we start worrying that this is that. And so these laws have been proposed in a lot of states. They've been passed in a lot of states. What can we do in the secular movement? Well, we can turn around. First, we try and lobby against these laws in the beginning. If they are going to be proposed, we try and make sure they include the word substantially rather than that. The problem is, if these laws come to a vote, they're probably going to get passed. It's very, very hard for a democratically elected official, especially if we look at states in the Bible Belt, it's very, very tough for them to turn around and stand up and say, I am voting against something called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act.
Right.
So what we believe in doing is trying to work and actually convincing people it's not necessary. You have more important things to do. I mean, there are enough problems around that we need government to help us solve, that maybe they shouldn't be trying to do this. It's very worrying, the spread in the states, because the state action affects our life in many ways more than the federal government does. So yes, we're worried. We're opposing them everywhere that they get proposed.
One interesting tactic that I've seen, a great example is the Satanists. The Satanists have really, used the exemptions that the religious are gaining to their advantage, saying, well, we're a religion. They did that with getting displays during Christmas time when there were nativity scenes, saying, well, you have to include a Satanist display. And I believe that the Satanist church also challenged an abortion ban.
They talked about a legal challenge. I'm really not sure if it went any further. Unfortunately, I think their challenge was legally flawed. What they challenged, the law that they challenged is the law that requires a doctor to provide this whole slew of information to a woman who's seeking an abortion. And that information as well, it's not just that the doctor's being forced to say it, that information is scientifically false. It's the sort of information, as you mentioned, claiming that a fetus feels pain at 8 weeks, for example. And they tried to say that it was a violation of the woman's rights to have to listen to this information, and I just don't think that's going to have legal traction.
Well, weren't they saying something? I think it was something like our religious beliefs say that we believe in medically accurate. You can really say anything, but you don't think it would stand up in court.
I don't believe it'll stand up because you don't have a constitutional right not to be lied to. Where I think that case would be much more interesting is if the doctor sued, because the doctor is being made to tell a falsehood.
Right.
And you can argue that under the First Amendment, you have a right not to be forced to say something that's against your beliefs. whereas it's much harder to argue that you have a right not to hear something.
Right, so you don't have a right not to be lied to, but you do have a right not to be forced to lie.
Absolutely.
That's very interesting.
And that's the way I would like to see the case brought. The Satanists have done some very interesting things. I mean, down in Oklahoma, they are building a statue, or trying to build a statue of Baphomet, I believe, is the god. It's a giant statue with goat's horns, and it's driving people absolutely crazy that they've probably got the right to do this. At the Center for Inquiry, on the one hand, we can see the point of these cases, and they make great news stories. They make fantastic news stories because they really annoy people. But on the other hand, our argument is we shouldn't be giving any religions special treatment. Yes, at the moment, it is fair. If one religion gets to put up a statue, you have to let every religion do it. But maybe the Oklahoma State House would look better without any religious statues outside, rather than with 47 or 84 different religious statues. Because that's the one thing, there aren't a small number of religions out there. There are, there are sort of 18 different brands of Lutheranism alone. Then do they each get one of their statues? Mm-hmm. Or do we decide there's one Christian statue? Is it a Catholic statue or a Protestant statue? Mm-hmm. Our argument is that let's keep religious freedom here, and let's keep the government here, and let's keep that separation, as Thomas Jefferson famously talked about.
Right, but the problem is that Supreme Court cases are very seldom overturned, or repealed. So for example, Greece versus Galloway was a huge loss for the secular movement.
Absolutely.
And now the response is, I believe the American Humanist Association is really taking the lead in the secular invocation program, really providing resources and getting people out there to their local city council meetings and things like that to provide a secular invocation. We lost on this issue. But there's a way we can still be represented.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm not quite certain what it is about serving on a local government body that means you're incapable of doing your job unless somebody stands up beforehand and gives an invocation. And we fully support secular invocations, because that's different. That's actually saying treat no religion the same as you treat religions. Give us the same rights. The Satanist approach, in our view, is they're claiming to be a religion. Right. And there was a very interesting case out in Oregon over this, where the American Humanist Association won a case in Oregon for a prisoner who was a humanist to be allowed to have a study group. And again, we support the decision, but we opposed the method that they used, because they used the claim that humanism is a religion. And we argue specifically in favor of secular humanism and say it's not a religion. Now, a secular humanist prisoner should not be discriminated against because he doesn't have a religion. But what's important that we do on this is that we don't say we're a religion, just treat us the same as other religions. It's important we turn around and say, let's stop discriminating against people based on whether they have a religion or not. If it's wrong to treat somebody differently because they're a Protestant rather than being a Catholic, or because they're Jewish rather than being Islamic, then it's also wrong to treat somebody differently because they are an atheist rather than a theist. Right. And that's the way we would like to see the cases framed.
I personally would like to see it that way too, but I feel so at a loss when it comes to the Supreme Court decisions, because I know they're more or less permanent. And when it came to Hobby Lobby, now I'm wondering, well, is it better to just kind of use what they've won against them, since at least when it comes to Congress and state legislatures, there's kind of room to go back, but the Supreme Court, it's more difficult.
Hobby Lobby is one of the cases that I would think is more likely to face maybe change in the future, simply because it was such a flagrant shift in the law. But you're right, I don't see them revisiting Greece, the town of Greece in the near future. I just simply don't see that happening at all. Mm-hmm. So yes, you're right. We have to work within that, and yeah, we in a perfect world we want a situation where town bodies don't need an invocation. beforehand. But we're not in a perfect world. We're in a world with Town of Greece, so we will carry on the fight to ensure that secular voices are heard as well.
Okay. So we've talked a lot about marriage equality. We've talked about religious exemptions. I'd like to move on a little bit to the anti-choice legislation that's up on the docket. So the theme of this show's upcoming political battles, and this is certainly going to be one now that we have so many Republicans in Congress. So in the first week that Congress was in session, there were 5 anti-choice bills put up. One of them was called the pain-capable bill, basically based on this idea that a fetus can feel pain by 20 weeks. And let's be clear, this has been debunked by multiple studies, and the American Medical Association, their journal actually did a review of all the studies that have been done on this and stated that this is not based on science. So it was, as I mentioned earlier in the show, this was even too extreme for the women in the Republican Party, so it was switched out for an attack on federal funding. And that's one of the main tactics that they're using.
These laws, and with the absolute fake science that they tend to entail, these laws would be funny if they weren't so serious. These laws cause people to die. Restricting abortion rights causes death, and it impacts lower income people more than higher income people. It impacts minority groups more than it impacts white groups. It's attacking people who the entire point of government is that the government should be helping rather than hindering. And yeah, the science is absolutely flawed, but they don't care. We had a vote in Congress on whether global warming was caused by man or not. It doesn't matter whether Congress thinks it is or not. I mean, it matters because it matters on what they're going to do about it. Right. But I believe it's Neil deGrasse Tyson who always says science doesn't care if you think it's right or not.
Right.
So this new tactic, I mean, we have been told that the country needs so much work done on it. And I think everyone from left to right would agree there's so many important things that we might not agree on what needs to be done, but everyone agrees there's a lot that needs to be done. And wasting the time on passing 5 separate bills on this and trying to put in an abortion ban, which the Supreme Court has turned around and said, no, that's illegal.
Right.
I mean, how much more time do you want to waste on a state level passing laws that can't have any impact?
Right, and I would like to review a few of the other tactics that they're using. So there's the fetal pain argument.
Right.
There's just the outright bans. There's attacks on funding. So there have been past attempts to defund Planned Parenthood.
Right.
And the hypocrisy of this is that there is already a law, I believe it's Title X, that says that Planned Parenthood none of the federal funding that it receives can go to abortions. So there is no taxpayer money going to fund abortions. But what it does to defund Planned Parenthood is take away the funds that they do for all their other services, including mammograms, contraception, maternal care, things like that. So there have been, federal and state level attempts to defund Planned Parenthood. There are attacks on admitting privileges. So basically requiring abortion providers to have admitting privileges at a local hospital. And that's highly problematic because it really doesn't, they say this makes women more safe, but it really doesn't, these abortion providers already have what they need to provide safe abortions, and it just creates another obstacle to being able to provide them. So this has effectively closed a huge number of abortion centers.
And we're seeing entire states now, entire states in the union that have no provider of abortion services. So women are forced to travel. They're forced to travel further. And then you put one tactic you didn't mention, requiring time periods.
Yes, waiting periods.
You turn up now. You might say, this is an important decision. Why can't a person wait 72 hours? Well, if you're in Texas and you're forced to travel 14 hours to get to your local abortion provider, and then you're being told you have to wait 72 more hours, Again, let's look at who this impacts. A woman who's in an abusive relationship may be able to get away in enough time to visit a doctor once. Asking them to go a second time may realistically place their life in jeopardy, that woman's life in jeopardy. And these people call themselves pro-life. They're pro-life up until the moment a child is born. As soon as a child is born, they give up all sense of responsibility and then, you know, no, we're not going to fund education for the child. We're not going to fund food for the, we'll cut back food stamps. But just as long as a 6-week-old fetus is kept intact in that, it's hypocrisy of the lowest order.
Yes, and you know, think about the women who can't afford to take off more than a day from work. You know, if your nearest abortion clinic is 50 miles away, this kind of attack really disproportionately affects, you know, low-income women, really the women who might need it the most.
And if the aim is to limit the number of abortions, and I think everybody agrees, the fewer abortions, if fewer abortions are needed, it's better, then isn't the way to do this to encourage contraception? And for low-income people, we've just had a Supreme Court decision turning around and removing the right to no copay contraception from many, many low-income women. And so there will be more pregnancies and more desired abortions, and now we're going to make it harder to receive the abortion. It makes no sense.
Right. And one last thing I would like to say about these bills that are up on the docket. So aside from the fetal pain one, there were 4 introduced by Senator David Vitter. And one of them was just one that I think is an interesting new tactic. It would ban abortions based on sex selection. So basically saying that, you know, it's illegal to know the sex of the child and then have that be the reason that you abort. But this is dangerous because in high-risk pregnancies, you might already know the sex of the baby, but then you realize, you know, that it's a dangerous pregnancy and terminate. So you could be liable for a federal offense for having an abortion and the government knowing that at this point you already know the sex of the baby. This is entirely a tactic I'm not familiar with.
We've seen this, obviously people can probably tell I'm not originally from the United States, and in certain
Nick, I'm going to actually pause you for a second because I think we have a call. It's Carla from Alexandria. Carla, are you there?
Okay. Hi. I'm just going to make this really quick. You all are excellent. I'd love for you to go into more at some point about, I believe his name was Ceausescu, the Romanian dictator, and what went on over there, banning all contraception and abortion. And that prior, this is banning abortion or even limiting it, it is no different than what went on with prohibition, that you ended up with people dead. They were serving them embalming fluid. People, and furthermore, this is another thing that really bothers me. If they're going to do everything to limit or restrict or whatever abortion and birth control, then let us do everything to limit and restrict anything that promotes birth, which would be sperm banks, egg banks, surrogacy, and so on.
Yeah, Carla,
I've got to go because I hear echoing, sir.
Okay. Carla, thank you. It's certainly true that the aim, banning abortion doesn't stop abortion. We've seen that. What banning abortion does, what abortion bans do, is that they get rid of safe abortions. Women continue to have abortions, and women die from unsafe abortions in unsafe conditions. So the idea isn't, I always maintain the idea isn't anything about protecting a fetus. It's plain and simple. It's an anti-sex idea, and it's punishing women who want to have sex. And it's despicable. And their aim isn't just to roll back abortion laws. Their aim is to roll back contraception laws. And they won't stop until they control what we can do in our own bedrooms.
Now, this is a skeptic show, so I do want to bring it back to what this has to do with religion. So personally, I think a lot of this has to do with, there's all these different tactics that are in the name of protecting women, but really, these people just really believe that life begins at conception, and they will do anything to enshrine that into law. And really, it's a religious interpretation, and not even all religious people feel that
Absolutely.
way. And it's just amazing to me that they think they have the right to say, well, this is when life begins, according to my religion. You may disagree, but I think it's important to me enough that I think that, I think you're a murderer, and I think that this should be enshrined in law. But really, I mean, you shouldn't have the right to impose your religious beliefs on other people. I mean, that's the definition of religious freedom. But I think there's a reason why they're using all of these tactics. And there's not bills saying life begins at conception, because then it's blatantly.
We're seeing, yes, this idea of, they call them personhood amendments,
right.
Which I mean, the science behind them, as we know, is incredibly flawed. They are seeking to impose a religious view of life, and yes, there is a scientific question out there of when does life begin. When do we start? But we have always accepted that when people's rights come into conflict with each other, something has to give. And yes, you many times will have, it's the focus on late-term abortions. Late-term abortions don't tend to be things people do because they're lazy or because they think it would be fun to have a late-term abortion. These tend to be tragic situations of wanted children with hideous deformities that will be born, may not even survive to birth.
Or it's a high risk to the mother.
To the mother. And when we turn around and focusing so much, and I'll be honest, the anti-abortion rights movement has finally gotten smart. We relied on them for a long time, actually being very dumb in their opposition.
What were their tactics in the past?
Well, they started out with simply just opposing abortion completely.
Ban regardless of rape or incest.
And then it was, well, we'll give exceptions, but it'll be based on rape and incest. But those are just unconstitutional. Even this Supreme Court would vote those down. So they started to get clever on it. They started looking at, let's keep abortion legal, but let's put restrictions on that make it very difficult. They cut the federal funding off. They started, and I call it a salami tactic. It's make it as difficult as possible to get an abortion. We have a law in Alabama now that if you're under 18, to get an abortion, you need parental consent. If the parent doesn't grant that consent, you can go to a court to get it. The state of Alabama will appoint a lawyer to argue the case for the fetus. So Alabama taxpayers' money is being used to pay for a lawyer for the fetus. There's no lawyer appointed for the teenage girl in this situation. There's a lawyer appointed with taxpayers' money to defend the fetus.
Wow.
It's Kafkaesque in its insanity. So they've moved on this, and the trouble is these laws probably are constitutional. It's very difficult to beat these laws in the courts. It's difficult to beat the requirements that you mentioned about attending requirements. The requirements that they've passed laws requiring that the door frames in clinics that provide abortion services have to be wide enough to fit a wheelchair, even if the wheelchair's never used in there.
Right.
Because it's simply a way of just trying to make it more expensive and to drive these people out of business. And then, on the other hand, we have to look at the other religious methods that they use when they go outside the law. When Dr. Tiller was shot in his church by a religious fanatic because he provided late-term abortions. He provided safe late-term abortions. We see clinics being bombed. So they don't limit themselves. The anti-choice people aren't limiting themselves to the law.
Right, and that reminds me of the case with the buffer zone.
Mm-hmm.
Could you speak a little bit to that?
Yes, it's a very tough argument on this, and I know a lot of people in absolute good faith can disagree on this. Abortion providers attract demonstrators. It's the people wandering outside. And a lot of states implemented laws which says, while you have the right to demonstrate, and I'll defend people's right to demonstrate, that it's their right to free speech. But you can't physically prevent people from getting into the building. And so they put what were called buffer zones up to allow free passage through, and those laws were challenged, and the free speech rights won out in the end. But yes, it is worrying that when we're in a situation that, how far does your right to protest go on it? You obviously have the right to protest it, and I'll defend that right fully, but you don't have the right to stop somebody going to see their doctor. And especially if at Planned Parenthood, the majority of women going in there aren't there for abortions.
For an abortion,
they're
maybe
there
for a regular checkup.
Yeah.
And now, because of the case, correct me if I'm wrong, you can follow a woman going into the clinic and talk to her until she gets there.
Right. And you can harass people. Yes, right. It's a right to harass, and we do, and we rightly take free speech very seriously in this country. And I'm not claiming I know exactly where the line should be drawn.
Right.
But a woman has a right to a safe, legal abortion. And that right shouldn't be taken away by protesters.
Right, I agree. All right, so we only have about a minute left. I do want to wrap up what we've been talking about. So these are upcoming political battles, not just for the secular movement, for the women's rights movement, the choice movement, the LGBT movement. But the reason we should be concerned is because, really these are all rooted in religious claims that are veiled in other tactics that in protecting women's health, but really it's about enshrining religion into the law.
Yes. Our belief, the Center for Inquiry, our belief, I think, as the secular movement as a whole, is that your religion is your business. We will defend your rights to practice your religion until it starts interfering with the rights of others. And when it interferes with the rights of others, our law has to treat one religion the same as another religion, and it has to treat no religion the same as any religion. And these laws seek to change that. These laws seek to roll the clock back to say, we are giving special rights to religion, and we can't allow that. So, yeah, we're going to see that. I think this year we're going to see a major success. We're going to see the Supreme Court rule in favor of same-sex marriage rights across the country. And we're also going to see a major fight back as well. We're going to see court cases like out in Colorado. We're going to see states passing exemption laws. And we're going to have to fight them, and we'll fight them through lobbying, and we'll fight them through court cases, because those violate an individual's constitutional right to equal protection under the law. It's enshrined in the 14th Amendment. Right. And you can't do that. So the fight goes on.
The fight goes on. Thank you so much, Nick, and thank you for watching today. That's a wrap. I hope I didn't end on that. Oh man, I find it so difficult to know when to wrap up.